Chat. Hello.
I'm realizing that I really don't like having the control of choosing when we go live. I miss
You miss giving that up. What is it? It is August 27th, 8:06 p.m., episode 4 of the OE cast.
It is.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Hello. Hello world.
Feeling good. Nervous. I mean, what? No, I'm totally chill. Totally cool.
I mean, that's great considering you're just some stranger that's shown up here.
It's true. I walked in.
How did you guess the password?
I had a delivery. I think Peter was expecting it, and he got excited, so he just let me in.
Wasn't there a thing like right in the beginning?
Where's my laptop?
Right in the beginning of the pandemic, where people were started shifting everything to Zoom. People were like hacking into Zoom rooms, meetings.
Yes, because their room codes were just like 8 digits long, so you just pick 8 random digits.
I don't know why I'm raising my hand, but I just want to call out that I think the wrong asset's still being used for the stream because it still says Sean for Brenna.
It just changed.
Oh no!
It did not change.
Yeah. This is not Sean. This is Brenna.
My secret
Brenna?
identity.
Good call. Good call.
Do you want to change your name? You could change your name.
To Sean?
Yeah.
Not your pronouns, though.
Oh no, I have no intention.
No,
of doing
just the name. Just the name.
What happened?
I know many
look
Seans.
like a Sean.
You could be Sean. Sean. Hello, this is
How do I
Sean.
take a pull off?
There we go. Now it's Brenna. Just like that.
There
Magic.
you go.
Just as
So
God
what
made
happened?
me.
That was correct earlier.
Yeah, that is
We
weird.
went live and then it broke.
Always happens.
So,
So, I think, Brenna, we wanted to have you onto the show because this is an intervention. I'm kidding. We want to hear your story. You have an interesting story. I mean, everyone's story is cherished and awesome as they come to know Christ. They come to know the church. But I think, your background, I think coming from a Jewish background too, what was that like? I'm very much interested in it too, just considering some of my family background. Also, I think it's going to be cool to hear, what exactly attracted you to the church and why as well, from even just like a liturgical perspective too. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh gosh. Okay. Hi, I'm Brenna. I am an author and gosh, what are interesting things about me? My head said she's gonna dive right into her story and give her whole life's history of 32 years somehow.
Yes.
In an hour or change. No, I'm a more creative type of person. Right now I'm working a more kind of very interesting manual kind of labor job, service industry job, which feels very penitential at times. But I think it's interesting that this is where I am in my life, not where I expected to be, but where I am. But in general, I tend to lean into more creative endeavors. I kind of been doing that theater and writing since I was younger. Faith has been an interesting roller coaster, starting deep in faith and then spending a very large chunk of time doing not much at all there, and then coming back kind of full force in what I think a lot of people think is the opposite direction of where I started. Yeah, that's been very, very odd.
So I guess starting with that, then when you say once being deep in faith, I assume your upbringing at a certain point, and were you Orthodox? Were you? I mean, I know a little bit about the different kind of, I don't know if it's denominations. I don't think that's right, but
I don't know anything.
sects. Yeah, that sounds better. But yeah, what sect did you grow up in?
So I was Orthodox. I was Ashkenazi Jew. Well, I guess the sect itself would be like Orthodox. There's Orthodox, there's conservative, there's Reform, and then there's who knows what. But we grew up Orthodox Jewish. I guess culturally it's Ashkenaz, just, genetically our history. My dad was Jewish, but he was not religious. So on my father's side, they're Jewish. My mom actually converted. They got married. It was a secular wedding. They had my oldest brother, And then my mom converted when my oldest brother was about a year old. So she became Orthodox Jewish. And then they got actually remarried. So we grew up religious. It was like the first 13 years of my life. We went to a yeshiva, which is a Jewish school, from first to eighth grade. And I think the kids, so me and my two older brothers, I think as best as you kind of can, when the father of the house isn't religious, but like the mom is like, she's going for it. She's in there. She's doing what she can. That's how we grew up. So we were religious as much as a kid kind of grasps it, you know?
Sure.
Right.
So we were, honoring Shabbat, and we, never mixed meat and milk. Not that mixing meat and milk is like the most intense of all the mitzvot, but it's one of them. It's in there.
Yeah.
So, we grew up studying it, learning it, went to yeshiva, and it was interesting because when we were no longer religious, my mom eventually, probably when I was around 12, 13, my mom stepped back. She has her reasons, but she stepped back. And so now neither parent were religious. But the kids, all of us, the three of us, had been so steeped in it that it was what we did. It was who we were, so to speak. But like a superficial kind of level, because when they stepped back, when my mom stepped back, I don't remember having an actual crisis, but there definitely, looking back, had to be some kind of crisis. I was holding on to what we used to do, which was, we had friends over all the time, and we were sitting together for family meals. And I preface this entire thing with, I love my parents to death. Would do anything for them. This is, in no way let this be any kind of like knock on my parents. This is just what child Brenna saw. So we used to have a lot of friends over, and we would sit together for family meals. Friday night is important, and Saturday is important, obviously. And eventually that kind of stopped. It pulled back. Holidays pulled back. And I just recall there was one really pertinent moment where I think it was like one last vestige of let's hold on to this and have that kind of. I always associated faith with like a familial kind of feeling. My best friend in middle school, I would go to her house every weekend. Like I brought my little Sailor Moon suitcase that I had, and everyone knew like Brenna brought her Sailor Moon suitcase. She's going to Mayrov's house. That's the weekend, and I'd go over there all the time, and we would always like try to stay up. Just fun fact, we always try to stay up on Saturday night, despite when Shabbos would end, and we tried to watch all 3 of the Lord of the Rings movies every Saturday. We tried our best, and we always fell asleep in like the halfway through the first one because it was always so late. But we did our best to watch the Lord of the Rings movies, The Princess Bride, and Robin Hood Men in Tights was our favorite movie.
Those are okay
Robin Hood
movies.
Men in Tights.
They were great. And that's right when the movies were coming out, the Lord of the Rings movies. So we all had like our kiddie crushes on like, oh, I'm claiming Aragorn and I'm claiming like it was. So I'm thinking back, it's so cute. We were kids, 13. But
Leaving Gimli out, I see. It's okay.
listen, you have a type. What are you gonna do? But
Wait, which one was yours?
so I think my friend had claimed Aragorn, and so I said, well, I'm taking Viggo Mortensen, the actual actor, and that's how we made it work.
Technicality. That's nice.
Exactly. But the kind of linchpin moment there was because I was going there so often, and even despite that her parents actually got divorced, which is still a big deal in the Jewish community, but I remember asking her dad if he would give me what's called the blessing of the Bat Bayit, which translates to the daughter of the house, because I wanted that feeling. Like I wanted to go there and feel like, this is family, because they were family to me. And he said, he told me, he's like, if you go ahead, ask your parents if that's okay, and if it's okay, then I'll do it. I don't remember if I ever actually worked up the nerve to ask, because like even now I feel like even having thought that feels a little disrespectful. And it wasn't that I didn't feel family at home. My family is my family. It is what it is. There was just something about the not even uniformity, because again, she essentially comes from a broken home. Her parents were divorced, but there was still something in that house that I loved. And I think I used to have it or used to see it in mine, but then I didn't because we had stepped back from faith. So at 13 years old, I had no idea that what I was looking for was this missing something. And I think that missing something was God and was faith. It was religion. But to me, it was just like, well, we're not here anymore. We're not doing this anymore. So off we went, you know?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I remember when I was a focused missionary, that there was this like statistic they had shown us about the importance of like fatherhood, especially in the faith. It was like the likelihood of the children like remaining in the faith based on if the father is like the leading like faith leader, versus like if it's just the mother, versus when it's both parents, versus no parents, obviously. Like, and it was always, if it was obviously both parents is the best, but even if it was just the father, it made a significant difference. It was like not even close, the other way around, where it's like just the mother. Like, there's still a really good chance that kids will remain in the faith, but yeah, that fatherly presence as a faith leader is huge. So
Yeah.
makes a difference.
Boys.
It's interesting because like
Oh no, I'm in the wrong chat room, guys.
it makes sense too. Like if you have a strong father figure who's strong in his faith, chances are if he's doing things right, that there's a healthy relationship with the mother, whether or not the mother is there or not. And I can't imagine a situation where the mom's like, I want nothing to do with this, but yeah, let's get married.
Yeah.
Also, like there's just a cascading down of order in a way. A good example of authority, not like, authority, but like authority in the classical sense of something that helps develop the excellence in you. And I could see that mattering. But yeah, for me, it was my mom. My mom kept her faith whenever things got more broken in my household. And my mom's faith was always important. She grew up going to Catholic school her entire life and was always like telling me stories about like seeing things. I'm like, I don't want that. But anyways.
I wanted to ask, like you talking about asking your friend's dad for a blessing and like faith and family being tied together. How did family ties change when your mom stepped back from faith, like on a human level? Like, what did just those natural family dynamics look like?
You mean like between the two of them or just the household in general?
Just the household.
So our family, well, so it's interesting. So our family, like I said, my dad's side is Jewish, however much they practice or not. My mom's side of the family is a much more kind of amalgam of a number of things, but it's mainly like they've explored different denominations of Christianity and some that I don't know that Catholics call Christianity, but so our family in general is like a little disjointed, you might say. I don't know a way to phrase it exactly. Like, my mom and my dad are the only ones I can think of on my mom's side who remained married. And I guess, unfortunately, I also am not able to continue that particular line because I have been married and I'm also divorced. But there's always been a little bit of that kind of oddness there. Again, all this preface with, I love my parents and I love my family. So we actually saw more of my mom's side of the family growing up. Holidays was with my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mom, my dad, my aunts, my great aunts. And it's a lot of like half siblings for my mom and for my uncle. So there's always been a little bit of that disjointedness. And I think that speaks a lot. Like, honestly, parenting, the most important job, potentially the hardest job in the whole world. It's we are the way we are, and my parents are where they are because of their parents and because of their parents. And I could spend a whole day just speculating on that. But I think because I didn't recognize it as a kid, but I think because of their history and now because of my history and how seeing my parents, there was always just a little bit of that oddness there. So I think that's another reason that seeing my friends and their families, and we would hang out all the time with all of our friends, they all had both parents. They might even have grandma and grandpa, Saba and Safta, the other grandparents, however you say it in German, also, based on their histories, they could have all been in the house together at the same time. And that just wasn't what we had. So I think when we stepped away from faith, I don't know that the faith element affected the rest of our being together with our family. But it did, like I said, we stopped doing certain things that I think did bring us closer. Like, we were sitting for family meals together because it was Friday night, it was Saturday night, whatever. So without that, it kind of became like Sunday mornings we would sit together kind of at the kitchen table and we'd watch cartoons, and my mom made a special jelly biscuit breakfast that we all remember very fondly. And it's like, even that kind of stepped back, and eventually it was just kind of like grab food and go. And so I think there was like a slow pullback of things that I just wasn't going to recognize at the time, but looking back, I can see it.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I thinking back now, like, this is just something I'm noticing now. It's like I think I see that as well in my family. So my family we're Filipino, so we're culturally Catholic. So I grew up going to mass all the time, but it was very surface level, right? Not very in-depth faith. But there was a period where my family started to just stop going to mass as a whole. And yeah, I think I noticed that same thing. It's like, even the meals, like dinner, we used to eat dinner together all the time. And then it was just like, oh, like some people leave a little bit earlier, and, and then eventually just like, oh, food's ready, like grab food whenever you're ready to eat. Yeah. And so interesting that was kind of a commonality as well.
It definitely affects you. Like, I think it affects, it will affect how the kids are viewing the parents, and it affects just, it could very well affect the parents' relationships. There is something there that I think is important.
In contrast, like, this is just making me ponder a bit. When my brother and I went to seminary, and when one of my sisters was consecrated, in my mind at least, that's when we as a family were all closest together, like, of all of our history. I mean, we're still a good family and have our ups and downs, but everyone puts a lot of work in, which is amazing. But it was also such an interesting paradox that while my brother and I were off in seminary and had very limited chances to talk to the family, like, that's when we were all closest. That's when we were closest to our parents. And that's something that a lot of us in seminary shared with each other. Like, we all had that experience of being closer to family, even though we were further apart. And just by the nature of vocation and faith,
Right.
it was a wild experience.
Interesting.
There could be something there too, just in that the whole like absence make the heart grow fonder, but also there's something to seeing your children like successfully launch,
Yeah.
As someone that lived with Peter for a month now, I could tell you less is more.
That's $1.
I would love the experience of having less is more in regards to me. I don't get that though.
Oh, none of us do.
Don't do it, Peter. Don't do it.
Yeah. So that's, I can relate to that too. I think my parents wanted things to go a certain way. Life happens. Things become harder. It's interesting. Growing up, I remember getting dragged. I'm a very disobedience is in my nature to a very high degree, and aggressiveness as well. And I remember getting dragged to CCD, and then I went to Catholic school for a little bit as well as a kid, and not wanting to go. There was actually one point in time my uncle is married to someone that's Jewish. At this point in my life, I didn't, I didn't find out until I was 20 that my biological father was someone different than the father who raised me, which is one of those weird things. Like, my dad grew up Catholic. He doesn't go to church this day. I tell him to go all the time. I tell him to go to confession. But he grew up in a family that loved God and went to mass. My nanny went to mass all the time. So, like, my dad I see as this person who reminds me of Saint Joseph in a lot of ways. Like, he doesn't speak much. He just does things for everyone. But again, doesn't go to mass. Room to grow. But that being said, my dad raised 3 kids who weren't, well, one of them was, but 2 other kids weren't his. And he never treated us differently. So I didn't find out that I was, my biological father was Jewish until I was 20. But when I was a kid getting dragged to CCD, I'd be like, I don't want to go. And my Aunt Shelley was upstairs with my Uncle Dan. And I was like, why can't I be Jewish like Aunt Shelley? Like, this is just, what, you get out of here. And everyone in my family was just cracking up around me because they're like, you kind of. But it's just one of those
Funny
things.
on other levels too. I can explain.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where I eventually left that household and I moved in with my uncle who, we go back and forth in this podcast. I feel like, sometimes we expect some of our people, parents need to obviously ferment the faith in us, but it doesn't necessarily mean the parent's going to be a Thomas Aquinas of the faith or a St. Francis of the faith. They just might be a faithful person where they know what is right and they do what is right. And my uncle was that person because things were problematic. My parents were falling into drug addictions, Oxycontin, ruin America in a lot of ways. But my uncle would just say, you have to do this. And I'd be mad at my parents. He's like, I understand, but you need to love your parents because they're your parents. And it wasn't a, let's talk about this. This is the right thing. Or like, he affirmed where I was coming from, but he also said, well, this is what you need to do. And it also resulted in like, you have to go to church. So as a kid growing up, going to church, and then him growing up, going to church, those figures were so critical to this day where I have that experience of both sides. And it's just like, if I don't have that, going back to what you said about the parents, like, I'm not who I am in good and bad reasons, as Peter can probably attest to about as a month after living here. And as my wife can clearly attest to as well after almost 7 years. But it's critical. So that's kind of your upbringing, I guess. What changed, I guess? What do you want to share? Like, what was your journey like going from, Orthodox Ashkenaz to Catholic Church? Was there did you spend time in the Christian world in general, or?
So I literally did not. There was nothing, no association with Christianity whatsoever. Like, literally none, which makes it just, I think people find it all the more strange. It's like, well, how did you get there? Because again, it's like, in my eyes, I keep thinking people think that it's like a complete 180 because the Jewish view on Christianity tends to be a lot harsher, I think, than a Christian view on Judaism, or certainly a Catholic view on Judaism. And I'll never forget one of the first things that the priest I spoke to, Father Smith, one of the first things that he said to me was like, sometimes there can be anti-Semitism in the church, and I want you to know that, we are praying for them and they don't mean it. And if you ever have that issue, come talk to me. And I was like, what? Because I'd never seen it. Whereas I grew up with a lot of like, the ex-gens are trying to convert us, and, they're lying about this and Xmas. And I'm like, so I grew up thinking that like Christians were like awful, all the peace and love, but also the Crusades. Like, that was 100% me. That was all I thought. No, when I when I pulled away from the faith myself, so it was probably just when I went to high school. I'd gone to a public school for the first time since kindergarten, and it was culture shock. But I spent a lot of time just kind of it was more not caring than anything else. It wasn't that God didn't exist or couldn't exist. I just didn't care
Yeah.
because it just didn't make a difference in my life. I was focused on like much more tangible right in front of me things, right? So like one important factor was just like, okay, I was also beginning a big weight loss journey, like because when I was 13, I was also at my highest weight of my whole life. So imagine like a 5 foot nothing girl, but also like 209 pounds, like a very large little girl. So like I was starting, like that's something I was focusing on top of also a brand new school and not talking to any of my old friends or barely talking to them. I was just focused on tangible things, getting straight A's, which I did when I was in high school. I was focused on finding new friends and kind of figuring out my way through this new world where for the first time I ever heard somebody say, "Oh man, I hate my dad. I hate my mom." And I was like, "What?" My gosh. if I said that, my gosh. So like it was all just brand new. I spent a lot of time doing more like theater. I'd always done performance since I was a kid. We had these little like yearly plays and skits that we put together. So it was just a lot of delving into who am I though, like, which is normal for a teenager. You know, that's just what you do. It led to a lot of mistake making. I'd meet people, and by the next year, I'd need to meet new people because there was no actual connection there. I didn't let there be an actual connection there because I didn't really trust them, or, you know, without making it a therapy session. Like, I never just clicked with anybody, and there's always some kind of buffer there. I kind of made friends and felt like I was coming into my own starting like my sophomore year when I joined choir and the after school plays. So I got a solid like 2.5 years of like these people. I'm like, oh yes, I found my people finally, even though literally outright some of them had said like to other people that they did not like me and did not want me around. But like Kid's not thinking about this when she just is kind of looking for her people, her crew. And then there was right at the tail end of high school, so I'm getting ready to graduate. It's the last, it's the spring musical, and we're ending things. And there was an incident with a lot of alcohol for the first time in my life. I don't know if you want that whole story. It's funny. It's
whatever you want to share, but I can tell you're not that special. I mean you are, but like, Eugen and I have shared a lot. Peter, I don't know about, but
Yeah, I went to
I
UCSD.
acted out tremendously in high school. I ran away from home, went to
about 10 feet
seminary.
away.
I ran away from home to the seminary.
teaching Greek in high school. Yeah,
That's right.
So I was told to share it, so I'll
control.
share it. It's not like a big deal, but so we had a cast party the night before our last show. So it was the Saturday night of the spring musical, my senior year, and I'd never had alcohol before in my whole life, like except not even like when I was younger, I had grape juice, not even wine, not even the good Rashi wine. I didn't have any, but whatever. So I remember my friend had given me, those novelty size coffee mugs, right? Not the normal, like the big ones that are like the size of your hand and around. I was given one of those, and it was half filled with orange juice and half filled with vodka. And I didn't taste any vodka. I tasted orange juice, so I downed it. And then I had a second one.
You're like, oh, they're being considerate. They just gave me the orange juice. Thank you.
Exactly. No, it's like, oh no, we put in our however many bucks. I was 17. This is cool. It's fine. And the last thing I remember was being handed the third one, and then I blacked out. I woke up play fighting with my friend over one of the like empty bottles, and then blacked out again and woke up in the bathtub. Not well.
I can imagine.
Oh,
Yeah. And I remember my brother is probably overhearing this from his room and laughing because this was the bad Chinese food incident. I drove myself home the next morning and was still not feeling well. And I was like, yeah, I had bad Chinese food. We were at the gas party. It's like,
I mean, to be fair, that
listen.
will do it to you. But that's
Oh
any bad
yeah,
food.
Yeah.
it was bad. That don't want to mess with those cats in the food. Anyway, but so it obviously, I'm sure it didn't fly. No one believed that, but whatever. But
Yeah.
the thing was, that was the moment of like, apparently a lot of people did not appreciate that I apparently didn't thank anyone for taking care of me that night.
Wow.
And so a bunch of people just flat out stopped talking to me, like for the rest of the year. Like
Wow.
a huge chunk of people just stopped talking to me, which was upsetting to say the least. So yeah, so there was still like, again, just a tangent of like back and forth, searching for something. There was a similar situation in college, where towards the end of the year there was some falling out with a group of people that I'd been in that department, the theater department. I was getting my BA in theater with teaching certification, and towards the end of that, there was a falling out with like half the theater department, and I was like, oh, great, fantastic. It's not a huge department, which makes it kind of worse because you're like intimately knowing these
Right.
people. So by the time I left college, also, I was basically by myself. It was me and my boyfriend at the time, who I'd met my junior year, 2011, something like that, sophomore, junior year, whatever. Yeah, it was basically just I had him and his friends and a couple of people from the theater department. But again, I was like kind of by myself. And in all this time, like what I was looking for was always, I kept calling it community. I'm just looking for my community. I'm looking for, my people. I think fortunately or unfortunately because of that, also my then boyfriend, he was also someone I clung to. He was first, and
Right.
boy, gosh, I was gonna, hold on to that fairy tale of like, oh, he's my first and he's so wonderful and we're gonna live happily ever after. We're so, we have so much in common and we're so in love. Also, let me not say this like I'm attacking him because I'm not at all. I respect that man tremendously,
Yeah.
just didn't work out. But college led into post-college, so we were still dating. Somewhere in college was also when I kind of found the first thing that I kind of definitively noted as like a truth, right? And that was a moment for me, because I feel like it was the first time I was kind of mature about a thought since, well, probably since ever. Because even faith, when I was a kid, I wasn't mature about it. It was just kind of there. But this was the first time I kind of found something. I was like, this is true, and no one is able to argue it in a way that I find satisfactory. And that was overhearing my dad and my brothers having these great discussions about libertarianism. I was sitting here like, I'm not really in the conversation. I'm just kind of soaking it in like a sponge. And eventually it was like, oh, there was like one point made. It was actually on the abortion topic was my moment where it was like, yes, these are little humans. These are little humans who have rights, liberty. Yes. And then I was like staunch libertarian. Like I was ticking off my professors because I was part of a teaching college and teachers love teachers unions. And I'm sitting here like, the union is terrible and they're taking, they're messing up the jobs and they don't have the right to strong arm their bosses. And I was like on a tangent, like you couldn't stop me. But I was definitely searching for some kind of like a truth. And that was the first time I found it and was like, yes, I'm grasping this.
Would you say that's kind of like the first moment also you kind of found like a community? Like you're like, this is, like you said, you were looking for a community. And so when you found that, it's like, oh, these are my people.
Yes and no. Yes, because anyone I found who believed the same thing, I was like, yes, like we've got it.
Sure.
But no, because most of those people were in Facebook groups and like nobody I ever met in real life.
Met them in real life, yeah.
It actually isolated me a fair bit because I couldn't have those conversations the same way. If you think about the people who are going to be involved in theater, it tends to be people who lean a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
So I was not helping myself any in that regard.
It's funny you mentioned that. Just before we got on here, we were at dinner, and well, before dinner, my wife shared with Peter and I how when she finished with a business degree. I think thankfully Peter helped edify that degree whenever he's explained some things to her in the past couple weeks. But she was also a theater major before that, and now she runs a performing arts school. And at one point, one of her professors basically said, "Hey, this I'm going to paraphrase, but like this whole Christian thing, can you tone it down?" And it wasn't like she was out there saying, convert or anything like that. It was just like she was behaving a certain way that came off as like she's set apart in a sense.
Right.
So like, yeah, totally get that, and especially from knowing theater kids besides her. Yeah. I had my libertarian moment too for a bit. I think that's an attractive ideology for a lot of people searching for something, because in some sense there's something we all know in some way wrong with our current culture, and like liberalism as a philosophy in general, like not just progressive or conservative, but like the modernist notion of liberalism and what that liberated us from the church. But yeah, that's interesting. So college libertarian, trying to find more truth, because if anything, like libertarians care about truth. I'll give them that. Yeah.
Us. I never left it.
Okay.
Well, to be fair, okay. Again, see, then this is where I just like start to isolate myself. But it's okay because I found my truth and I'm good. And I found where it all coincides for me. But yeah, it's sort of like advanced to people don't like the word anarchist, and I get it. No worries. But all it literally comes down to is no rulers versus no rules. So it's a matter of like, okay, the only king that I have is God, is Christ. That's it. Mm-hmm. Man-made things are a way. But yeah, it's definitely one of those. It's an ideology of the individual, and that's where it stops. Is what I've come to learn. That's where it stops. It's a foundation of a type, but you have to put the moral element on top of it, or else you end up with, unfortunately, things like the whole Roe v. Wade. It stems from you did not add that moral element to it, where, yeah, you think you have the right to do that, and even if you believe you have the right to do that, which you don't, but even if you believed it, should you be doing that? No, and there's many reasons why.
Yeah, we could possibly avoid getting into this because this is an
Sure.
interesting conversation. But I do know, like, is it Rawls, Rawls, or someone, he was a political anarchist, libertarian. There is a harm principle that is kind of, I think, limiting in the libertarian philosophy that as Catholics, I think, kind of pushes against it. Like Catholic theology in general, it tends to be much more, I guess, I'll take a step back. Going back to what we were talking about with parents.
We can talk later.
No, but like a little thought exercise, like going back to what we were talking about with parents, like we had rules, but also the examples by the parents helped enforce those lifestyles. And I do think in a classical notion of what authority is, not the modern notion, but like in our modern notion, any type of authority can be viewed as like pernicious or bad. But starting in the home, but then also like throughout history, classical examples of authority are one that set an example of virtue to will the good of others. And I do think politically there is a harm principle at the core of certain libertarian notions that is very limited, where it would advocate for things that could be pernicious for society as a whole, based on the fact that if it's your choice, that's fine, it's not my choice. But I think as followers of Christ in the church, we might be called to do something differently. So that's where I think for me, it was something that kind of pushed me out of it. But again, we don't have to kind of
No,
disgusting.
I find it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
I think I got myself hyped up to tell a particular story, but that is part of the story for sure.
Yeah, you'll like this. I got to meet Ron Paul when I was working in Congress. I was a huge fan of him. I had a photo of Ron Paul holding
Oh
a
my gosh.
lightsaber on my door when I was living in D.C. And I was like, Ron Paul, I just want you to know I have a photo of you. He's like, oh, it's great. But yeah, I mean, I've read Hayek.
jealous.
I read a lot. I dug deep into libertarian philosophy for sure. But anyways,
Yeah.
How about what if we put a pin in libertarianism and politics and get back to faith journey and then maybe
Yeah.
return if we have time? Because politics are fun. Everyone loves.
Told
Good
you,
point.
I'm not quite the standard track of things. But
I don't think we'd invite you on if you were the standard track.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, yeah.
It wouldn't be interesting otherwise. You got to shake it up a little.
Now everybody that hasn't been invited on the podcast is like, oh, is that what they think of me?
Oh, my standard. So basic.
What did P. Tony say about everybody?
Basic Catholic girls. Anyway, but yes, that was part of it. Just in that, it was a truth that I found. I think it didn't strike me then, but later on, as many things did, looking back, it strikes me now as like this was a moment. That was a moment. Take it how you will, but like questioning the basics of the standard American diet was a moment for me. Like honestly, when I discovered my brother discovered the paleo diet, and it's, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's it's going back to a basic kind of ancestral diet. So you're focusing on meats, vegetables, with the occasional fruits and nuts and seeds, and you're basically taking out processed sugars and carbohydrate heavy things, the grains and things like that. So as an overview, basically. And this is from the man who literally used to, like, he'd make like 2 sandwiches. So you've got 4 slices of bread there, and then he'd like take a 5th as like a test slice. And who we fondly remember at one point literally hollowed out one of our challah loaves and then put the loaf back on the table. So we didn't know it was hollowed out. Like, the man who loved bread introduced me to the paleo diet, or introduced us as a family, but we all thought he was crazy. And it was when the man who's known for the paleo diet, Mark Sisson, was on a podcast with a man named Tom Woods, who is a big libertarian theorist and talker. When they got together, I was like, oh my gosh, there's validity here. Hold on. And I was really hyped about it. I'm like, I'm giving it a try. And then, of course, in my very Bren way, I went overboard and ate salad only for like a whole week with like meat in it. And by the Friday, this was during my student teaching, and by the Friday, the smell of oil and vinegar actually made me nauseated because that was all I was eating for a week.
oh, well, now you know what it's like to be an Italian. So.
Hey.
Hey.
Except you guys get the pasta. I couldn't have pasta anymore.
And a little garlic.
I love
Garlic.
garlic.
Really, all you needed was garlic.
I so at this point, I'm just looking for labels, which is probably not good for me, but just for the sake. Wait, who was talking about? Oh no, that wasn't the Shia LaBeouf interview. He was talking about how someone broke down prayer for him as like some concrete steps. And he was like, I just needed the labels. That was super helpful. So like at this point, I'm not really getting the vibe that you're an atheist or even agnostic. You seem more like apathetic. Like you're searching, but not looking at faith at all. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yes, 100%. Yes. It was like I just didn't care. I wasn't thinking about it. I kept saying there's community missing in my life. It's community. And the only connection there is that the last time I had community was when I was Jewish. And I always said that. I was like, man, last time I had like a group like that was my friends in middle school. So that's the only tie there. But yeah, I was not looking, did not care. And then I guess the point after college is actually probably where I was just kind of soul searching in earnest. And still it had nothing to do with religion at the time. After college, I graduated. A few months later, I moved from New Jersey down to Georgia, which in and of itself was also kind of a powerful moment that I was ignoring because I put myself into a long distance relationship. I was still with my ex at the time. I asked him, I was like, how would you feel if I moved to Georgia for a few months to kind of like, try out my degree, see if I can find something theater related. And he gave the go ahead. He said he was okay with that. So for 2 years, we did long distance, for better or for worse. I was, we picked Georgia because we have family friends down there.
Sure.
And it was a lot of, it was all manner of like, it was the first time I was living on my own. I got a job all by myself, big girl job, and so there was a lot of thank you. There was a lot of this coming into my own very rapidly,
Right.
which also included things that like, I feel like the dodgier I sound about it, the worse it's actually going to sound. But like, I was doing other things I'm not doing anymore. Like, with how do I phrase this?
I mean,
Chat, what do you think he was doing?
sometimes when we abandoned the moral life. No. That's
I've
a
heard
reference
that
to Peter.
before.
Yeah, that's a reference to you, Peter.
How much is I was honestly debating because it's kind of an important part of the story, because it kind of led to another truth, honestly. But I don't know how much is too much. You were I was totally dogfighting. No. So my parents at the time and for a while had a lot of ties to the burlesque community. I don't know how else to. It is what it is. They had their ties to that community, and so like some of the people I knew down there were friends of theirs who were tied to that community, and they were just people I knew, and they were all so kind to me. They were really gracious to me, and these were people that I now knew in person. So I spent time in that community, and that's where I learned also that like that is not my people. They were so great to me. Those were not my people. And it was, it told me, in my head, it told me, like, wow, you are super conservative. They'd call you prude. And you know what? That's okay. I'm totally cool with that because these are not things I want to do. These are not people I kind of want to be around that much. And so I stepped way, way back. But it was just the truth it told me was that whatever is happening, if that's like kind of what modern society is like, that's not what I want to do. It's not where I want to be. So after 2 years, I went back to New Jersey because I was lonely and I wanted to go back and be with my boyfriend and my family. And that's also when we got engaged. So the next month he had proposed to me. And I recalled specifically one, and this is, shame on me, and it is what it is. But one, when he proposed, I knew, like, I didn't actually, whatever feeling I was supposed to have in my fairy tale that I was kind of writing, I didn't feel it, but it was the next step, right? You survived long distance, you've been together for 5 years, time to get married. So we were kind of like following a script. And somewhere in all of this, there is writing. I am a writer. Somewhere in all this, there's writing happening too. But so the main thing there too was, one, I was basically like following a script. And two, when I planned the actual ceremony, very specifically, we took God out of it. Like that was actually one of those moments where I was thinking about it and specifically took God out of it. Nowhere was there any reference, nowhere. And we made sure of it. And this is from my ex, who in fact was a Catholic. So of the, yeah, he was a non-practicing Catholic, cradle Catholic. His parents, I believe, were going to, I didn't know there was anything other than it's just they go to church, but they were probably attending a Novus Ordo Mass, I think. I'd never heard of Latin Mass. I didn't know anything about Christianity, but non-practicing Catholic. But he wasn't religious. So yeah, we took God out of it entirely. And that was important because this is our wedding. It's about us. It's not about like fairy tale, blah, blah, blah. It's about us. So you knew that was off to a strong start. But yeah, I think that was the first time that I actually was thinking about it again, and I knew I didn't want it. Apparently, you'll have to ask my brother about it, but somewhere in there, while I was exploring things and truths, there was something witchy. I don't know, something about crystals and tree hugging. I don't remember this part of the story.
Wow.
Yeah.
No,
I don't remember it, but it's in there somewhere apparently.
might be through
America.
God's grace there.
Could be. Could be. A little Holy Spirit being like, Brenna, just no, move on. You'll get there.
Or as we like to call the third person.
The third.
The
We're
third guy.
continuing with that. Let's see. I wasn't
like that
alive for
particular
that,
one.
but you know.
That's a reference to a great show. Anyone who gets it, proud of you.
Crap. If you know, you know. But yeah, in there, we were married for about just shy of a year and a half, and I know, and we actually moved back down to Georgia, he and I, and in this time I was also getting very close with my brother. We were like, we would just talk more and share thoughts, and I confided him. Honestly, that part I don't fully remember either. I don't know. I was just very self-absorbed in that time period. Very self-absorbed. But we were definitely close by the time I moved back down to Georgia with my ex-husband, because he also moved with us, my parents' retirement home, and we were kind of watching it for them. So he and I were talking a lot, and I knew something just really, really wasn't right. Just a lot of things kind of fell on me at once, just feeling-wise. And this is where I learned another truth, which came at, whether you want to call it a fortunate or unfortunate time, after dragging my ex-husband down to Georgia with me because we were going to live together down here. I learned a lot about like intersexual dynamics, men and women, relationships, masculinity and femininity, and it definitely affected my relationship. And I want to say it's for the better, because I already knew something wasn't right there. But that particular truth thread about people was one of those final straws of like, you can't ignore this because you're already tired of being so unhappy. And that's what it was. That crashing feeling was just acknowledging that I was really unhappy. Just really unhappy. And I just couldn't put my finger exactly on why. So it always just went back to community. The key word here is community. Somewhere in there, it's just, I'm missing my people. But when your husband is not your people and your husband's friends are not your people, it becomes really difficult to make that decision of like, I have to leave and find what it is I'm looking for. Yeah. But that's what I did. So it was December 28th. It was actually a few days after my grandmother passed away. That was kind of one of those, I can't ignore this. Like, I love my grandmother, and she was such a tremendous like idol for me. This beautiful woman, full of grace. She was doing her own soul searching through different parts of Christianity, and something about losing her and the reactions I saw to it, kind of just like, I can't ignore this anymore. So that was when I stepped back and I was like, can't do it anymore. But that made 2019 a very interesting year. 2019 was, it was going through the motions of a divorce. It was, again, a lot of looking inward, and that was really important. And that's where we start to come back to, I started looking back at Judaism, because that was what I knew. And when I did that, I was looking, there are some neighborhoods around Atlanta that are big Jewish communities. So I started looking and like pondering, and like, maybe my oldest brother, in all of this stretch of 2 decades, my oldest brother had returned to Judaism, and he's still like deep in there, and he is so passionate, and it's amazing to see. He is so passionate. He had actually visited one time, And I was like gung ho on like, I'm going to figure out Judaism again because these are my people and that's in my blood. It's literally in my blood, you know, like I am ethnically Jewish. And I recall a moment that he knew I was looking and my other brother knew I was looking and my parents knew I was looking. My oldest brother told me something along the lines of, whatever you want to do. It's not my decision. It's your decision. Whatever you want to do. And something about that was not what I wanted to hear. I think I wanted to hear a beautiful welcome back. You know, I missed you and I love you and let's walk through this together. Not a, all right, go for it. Have fun. And then it felt very like step back. Because it kind of affirmed this feeling I already had of like, I felt like I was on the outside looking in for Judaism. I was meant to be inside, but I'd been outside for so long, I don't know how to open the door. I don't know how to step back in. And I didn't feel as welcomed. So, mind you, too, sorry, I know I'm talking about